The morning sun spilled a golden glow through the frosted glass windows of Heritage Bakes, casting soft shadows across the worn oak countertops. The air carried the warm, familiar scent of freshly baked donuts, cinnamon-dusted pastries, and the faint bitterness of brewing coffee, a sensory embrace that had greeted the neighborhood for 40 years. From across the street, Michael Carter stood motionless, his breath fogging in the crisp autumn air. At 52, with salt and pepper hair tucked beneath a faded baseball cap and his tailored suits replaced by a nondescript sweater and jeans, he looked nothing like the man who owned this beloved bakery. To the world, he was just another customer, a stranger blending into the early bustle of Maplewood Avenue. But to Michael, Heritage Bakes was more than a business. It was his grandmother Margaret's legacy, a promise etched into his very bones. He adjusted his fake glasses, their weight unfamiliar on his nose, and whispered to himself, "Today's the day." For 3 consecutive quarters, the bakery's profits had plummeted, a slow bleed that spreadsheets and financial reports couldn't explain. Michael had pored over the numbers in his home office until midnight, the glow of his laptop illuminating stacks of invoices and sales records. The data pointed to a mystery: sales were down, customer visits were dwindling, yet costs were inexplicably high. Heritage Bakes had weathered recessions, trends, and competition before, always emerging stronger. So why now? Why was the heart of his grandmother's dream faltering? Michael's fingers tightened around the leather-bound journal in his coat pocket, a relic he'd found just last night while rummaging through old boxes in the attic. It was Margaret's, her neat cursive detailing the founding of Heritage Bakes in 1985, when she baked her first batch of donuts on their kitchen table. "A bakery is more than flour and sugar," she'd written. "It's a place where people gather, where stories are shared over coffee and cake. Trust the right people, Michael, or it all falls apart." Those words had haunted him, a reminder of his responsibility and his failure. He'd entrusted the bakery's operations to Daniel Brooks and Anthony Russo, 2 managers he'd promoted 18 months ago for their ambition and charm. Had that been his mistake? The bell above the door jingled as Michael stepped inside, the familiar sound both comforting and jarring in his disguise. The sweet aroma enveloped him: vanilla, butter, and the unmistakable tang of Margaret's secret donut recipe. At least that hadn't changed, or had it? He shuffled to the counter, keeping his eyes low, his posture slouched to avoid recognition. Behind the register stood Ryan Mitchell, a 23-year-old cashier Michael had hired last year for his quick smile and knack for remembering customers' names. Today, though, Ryan's greeting was mechanical, his smile barely reaching his eyes. "Welcome to Heritage Bakes. What can I get you?" "Just a chocolate-glazed donut and a black coffee, please," Michael mumbled, pitching his voice lower, rougher. He studied Ryan's face. There was a tension there, a flicker of unease that hadn't been present months ago. "$4.75. Ryan replied, his tone flat, almost apologetic. Michael's heart stuttered. $4.75? For a single donut and coffee? Last year, the same order cost $3. He handed over a crumpled $5 bill, watching Ryan's fingers hesitate over the register. As if he too were embarrassed by the price taunt as Ryan prepared the order, Michael's gaze wandered the bakery. The display case sparkled with rows of pastries, but something felt off. The donuts, usually plump and glossy, looked slightly deflated, their glaze uneven. The walls, adorned with faded photos of Margaret at the grand opening and customers celebrating birthdays, seemed to watch him with silent judgment. He took his order to a corner table, choosing a spot with a clear view of the counter. The first bite of the donut confirmed his suspicions. The texture was dense, almost doughy, and the chocolate glaze tasted artificial, nothing like the rich Belgian chocolate Heritage Bakes was known for. His stomach twisted, not just from the Disappointing pastry, but from a growing dread. Two men emerged from the back office, their voices low but sharp. Daniel Brooks and Anthony Russo, both in their late 30s, exuded a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Daniel, tall with slicked back hair, leaned against the counter, while Anthony, shorter and wiry, scanned the room with a predator's alertness. Michael strained to hear their conversation, his heart pounding as he pretended to sip his coffee. "Another slow morning," Daniel said, his voice carrying a smug edge. "At this rate, Carter will be begging us to buy him out by Christmas." Anthony snickered, folding his arms. "He's too soft for this game. Always droning on about quality and tradition. Does he think people care about that sentimental nonsense anymore?" Michael's hand froze midway to his mouth. They were talking about him, the old man who trusted them to run his family's legacy. His pulse quickened, a mix of betrayal and rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. He forced himself to stay seated, to listen. "Did you see the latest numbers I sent him?" Daniel continued, lowering his voice as a customer approached the counter. He looked like he might cry. "Beautiful work, Anthony." "No idea we've been bleeding this place dry," Anthony replied, his grin sharp. "He thinks it's the economy or changing tastes, clueless." The customer left and the two retreated toward the kitchen. But Michael had already shifted to a closer table, his movements slow and deliberate. "Once he sells, we gut this place," Anthony whispered. "Rebranded as Urban Bakes, triple our investment in a year. No more of this family recipe garbage. The best part?" Daniel added, his voice dripping with disdain. "He'll practically give it to us for pennies once he thinks it's failing." Michael's vision blurred. With anger, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. Every instinct screamed to stand up, rip off his disguise, and fire them on the spot. But years as a corporate attorney had taught him restraint. Accusations without evidence would lead to denials, and he couldn't risk tipping them off. He needed proof, irrefutable, airtight proof. The bell chimed again, and Clara Thompson entered, her walking cane tapping softly against the floor. At 80, she was a fixture at Heritage Bakes, a customer since Margaret's first batch of muffins. Her warm smile faltered as she approached the counter. "The usual, please, Anthony," she said, her voice kind but frail. "One blueberry muffin and a small tea." $6.50, Anthony replied, not bothering to look up from the register. Clara's smile wavered. $6.50? The last week it was new prices. Anthony cut her off, his tone sharp. "Costs are up everywhere." "Ma'am." Michael watched as Clara counted out coins from her purse, her hands trembling slightly. This was the woman who'd brought homemade cookies to Margaret's funeral, who cheered at the bakery's expansion 20 years ago. Now she was being treated like an inconvenience by a man plotting to destroy everything her loyalty represented. Michael's jaw tightened, his resolve hardening. Ellen Harper, the head baker who'd worked alongside Margaret for 15 years, emerged from the kitchen, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Her usually bright face was drawn, her eyes flicking toward Daniel and Anthony with barely concealed contempt before she retreated. Michael noted her expression. Something was wrong. Deeper than he'd realized. As more customers trickled in, Michael observed a pattern. Regulars, like Henry Walsh, a retired teacher who'd been coming every Friday for a cinnamon roll, left with furrowed brows, their disappointment palpable. Tourists and first-timers filled the gaps, but their faces lacked the warmth of the bakeries. Loyal patrons. The community that Heritage Bakes had fostered for decades was slipping away. One final exchange caught Michael's ear as he prepared to leave. "Got a buddy at Crestview Investments looking at the books next week," Anthony whispered to Daniel, their heads close together. "Once he confirms how bad things look, we'll have our offer ready. Carter won't have a choice but to sell. To our shell company." Daniel smirked. "He'll never know it's us until the papers are signed." Here's to Heritage Bakes last Christmas and Urban Bakes first. Michael slipped out of the bakery, the weight of their betrayal pressing against his chest like a physical force. The cool autumn air hit his face, clearing the fog of shock and replacing it with a steely determination. These men weren't just mismanaging his business. They were dismantling his grandmother's legacy, piece by piece. But they'd underestimated him. Before inheriting Heritage Bakes, Michael had been a corporate attorney specializing in fraud cases. He knew how to build a case, gather evidence, and deliver justice. Back at home, Michael sat in his dimly lit office, Margaret's journal open before him. Her words echoed, "Trust the right people, Michael, or it all falls apart." He'd failed her once by trusting Daniel and Anthony. He wouldn't fail her again. Tomorrow, he'd begin his investigation in earnest, armed with the skills of his former life and a burning need to save Heritage Bakes. They thought they were dealing with a sentimental fool, but they were about to meet the steel beneath Michael Carter's gentle exterior. The bell above Heritage Bakes' door jingled as Michael Carter slipped inside, his baseball cap pulled low and fake glasses perched on his nose. It was the second morning of his undercover mission, and the bakery's familiar warmth felt like a betrayal of its own. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon swirled around him, but beneath it lingered a faint chemical tang, a whisper that something was amiss. At 7:30 a.m., the morning rush was thinner than it should have been for a Tuesday. Where were the regulars? The teachers grabbing coffee before school, the construction workers picking up pastry boxes. Michael scanned the room, noting the half-empty display case and the absence of the usual chatter that had once defined Heritage Bakes. He shuffled to the counter, his sneakers scuffing the polished wood floor. Ryan Mitchell, the young cashier, stood behind the register, his shoulders hunched as if bracing for something. "Welcome to Heritage Bakes," Ryan said, his voice flat, eyes darting toward the back office. "What can I get you?" "Chocolate glazed donut and a black coffee," Michael replied, keeping his voice gruff, his face partially turned to avoid recognition. As Ryan rang up the order, Michael's eyes flicked to the price display. $4.75. The same exorbitant price as yesterday. He handed over a $5 bill, watching Ryan's fingers hesitate, a flicker of guilt crossing the young man's face. "Here you go," Ryan said, sliding the donut and coffee across the counter. Michael took his order to a corner table, choosing a spot near the kitchen door where he could observe without drawing attention. He bit into the donut and his stomach sank. The texture was wrong, too dense, almost gummy, and the chocolate glaze tasted like cheap syrup, far from the velvety Belgian chocolate his grandmother Margaret had insisted on. This wasn't just a bad batch. It was a deliberate departure from Heritage Bakes standards. As he sipped his coffee, which was bitter and over-roasted, the back office door swung open. Daniel Brooks and Anthony Russo stepped out, their voices low but sharp, like knives slicing through the morning quiet. Daniel, tall and impeccably dressed, leaned against the counter, his slicked back hair catching the light. Anthony, wiry and restless, scanned the room before joining him. Michael tilted his head down, pretending to read a newspaper, but his ears strained to catch their words. "Another slow morning," Daniel said, his tone smug. "If this keeps up, Carter will be on his knees by New Year's." Anthony chuckled, folding his arms. "He's got no spine for this business. Always yammering about community and legacy. Thinks he's running a charity instead of a bakery." Michael's grip tightened on his coffee cup, the ceramic warm against his palms. They were talking about him mocking the values his grandmother had built Heritage Bakes upon. He forced himself to stay still, to listen as their conversation grew bolder. "Did you tweak the numbers for the quarterly report?" Daniel asked, lowering his voice as a young woman approached the counter. Michael recognized her as Sophie Nguyen, a part-time cashier who'd started 6 months ago. her ponytail bouncing as she hurried to restock the display case. "Yeah, shaved another 10% off the revenue," Anthony replied once Sophie was out of earshot. "Carter's so out of touch, he'll think it's the market. By the time Crestview Investments reviews the books next week, he'll be desperate to sell. And when he does," Daniel said, his grin sharp, "we swoop in with our shell. Company, Urban Bakes will be up and running by spring, and this sentimental dump will be history." Michael's blood ran cold. A shell company? They weren't just mismanaging the bakery. They were orchestrating its downfall to buy it cheap and rebrand it. His mind raced, piecing together their plan: drive away customers, tank the profits, and convince him the business was failing. But he needed more than overheard whispers. He needed evidence that would hold up in court. The bell chimed, and Clara Thompson entered, her cane tapping softly against the floor. Her white hair was neatly pinned, and her smile, though frail, carried the warmth of someone who'd been coming to Heritage Bakes for decades. "Good morning, Anthony," she said, her voice gentle. "My usual, please, one blueberry muffin and a small tea." $6.50, Anthony replied, barely glancing up from the register. Clara's smile faltered, her eyes widening. $6.50? But last week it was $4. "New pricing," Anthony snapped, his tone cutting. "Costs are up, ma'am." "Nothing I can do." Michael watched as Clara opened her purse, her trembling fingers counting out coins one by one. The sight pierced him. Clara, who'd brought flowers to his grandmother's funeral, who told stories of sharing muffins with her late husband here, was being treated like a nuisance. His jaw clenched, but he stayed silent, scribbling notes on a napkin hidden beneath the table dot as Clara shuffled to a table. Sophie Nguyen hurried to the counter with a tray of croissants. In her rush, one slipped off the tray, hitting the floor. With a soft thud, Anthony's head whipped around. "Careful, Sophie," he barked, loud enough to make her flinch. "You think we're made of money? Drop another one, and it's coming out of your pay." Sophie's cheeks flushed, her eyes glistening as she mumbled an apology and knelt to clean up. Michael's heart ached. She was barely 20, a college student working to pay tuition, and Anthony's cruelty was palpable. The customers nearby shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. The bakery, once a haven of warmth, felt like a pressure cooker. Ellen Harper emerged from the kitchen, her gray hair tucked into a bun, her apron dusted with flour. At 60, she was the backbone of Heritage Bakes, having baked alongside Margaret for 15 years. Her face, usually bright with pride, was drawn, her eyes flicking toward Daniel and Anthony with a mix of exhaustion and contempt. She caught Sophie's eye, offering a subtle nod of reassurance before disappearing back into the kitchen. Michael made a mental note Ellen knew something, and he needed to talk to her. The morning wore on, and Michael observed a troubling pattern. Regulars like Henry Walsh, a retired teacher who'd been coming every Friday for cinnamon rolls, hesitated at the register, their expressions souring at the prices. A young couple, likely tourists, ordered pastries, but left without the usual smiles Michael remembered from happier days. The bakery's loyal customer base was eroding, replaced by one-time visitors who'd likely never return. As Michael prepared to leave, a delivery truck pulled up outside, its engine rumbling. Tom Bradley, a grizzled driver who'd been delivering flour and butter to Heritage Bakes for a decade, unloaded crates at the back entrance. Michael lingered near the door, catching snippets of Tom's conversation with Ryan. "These new suppliers Daniel's got us using," Tom muttered, shaking his head. "Cheap stuff, kid. Not like the premium goods we used to get. Tastes different, don't it?" Ryan nodded, glancing nervously toward the office. "Yeah, but Daniel says it's what Mr. Carter wanted to cut costs." Tom snorted. "Carter? That man's grandmother would roll in her grave if she knew what's going in her recipes." Michael's pulse quickened. "New suppliers? That explained the donut's off flavor, the artificial glaze. Daniel and Anthony weren't just raising prices. They were swapping out premium ingredients for cheaper alternatives, pocketing the difference or worse. He slipped out the front door, his mind racing. The betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined, but he needed concrete proof documents, records, something to nail them. Back in his car, Michael pulled out his grandmother's journal, its pages worn from years of handling. He flipped to a passage he'd read last night. A bakery thrives on trust in your ingredients, your people, your customers. Lose that, and you lose everything. He'd lost that trust by handing the reins to Daniel and Anthony, but he wasn't defeated yet. His years as a corporate attorney had taught him how to unravel fraud, and he'd start tonight, digging into the bakery's records. But first, he needed allies. Ellen's contemptuous glance and Ryan's unease suggested they suspected something. Could he trust them to help? As he drove home, the image of Clara counting coins and Sophie's tearful apology burned in his mind. Heritage Bakes wasn't just a business. It was a community, a legacy. Daniel and Anthony thought they could tear it apart, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Michael Carter wasn't the sentimental fool they mocked. He was a man with a plan, and he'd fight for his grandmother's dream with every ounce of his strength. The pre-dawn silence of Heritage Bakes was a stark contrast to its daytime bustle. At 4 a.m., the bakery stood dark and still, its frosted windows reflecting the faint glow of streetlights. Michael Carter slipped through the back entrance, his rarely used master keys cold in his hand. The familiar scent of flour and yeast greeted him, but it was laced with an unfamiliar staleness, as if the kitchen itself were holding its breath. His heart pounded not from fear of being caught, but from the weight of what he might uncover. The overheard conversation between Daniel Brooks and Anthony Russo had lit a fire in him, and now, armed with his old corporate attorney instincts, Michael was ready to dig. He moved swiftly through the kitchen, his flashlight casting sharp beams across stainless steel counters and racks of cooling trays. The storage room was his first stop. Clipboard in hand, he began a meticulous inventory. Sacks of premium flour, boxes of Belgian chocolate, bottles of Madagascar vanilla extract. Each item was a cornerstone of his grandmother Margaret's recipes, the soul of Heritage Bakes. But as he cross-checked the physical stock against the digital inventory system on his phone, discrepancies emerged like cracks in a foundation. The system claimed they'd used 20 pounds of Belgian chocolate last week, yet the shelves held only half that amount. Premium butter was short by 30 pounds, and organic eggs were missing dozens of cartons. The numbers didn't add up. Sales couldn't justify such losses. Where's it all going? Michael whispered, scribbling notes in a small pad. He crouched to inspect a crate labeled New Supplier, Sunrise Foods, a name he didn't recognize. Inside were blocks of waxy, off-brand chocolate, a far cry from the silky imports Heritage Bakes had used for decades. His stomach churned. This wasn't cost-cutting. It was sabotage. Before the first bakers arrived, Michael slipped out, locking the door behind him. The cool morning air did little to quell the anger simmering in his chest. Daniel and Anthony weren't just mismanaging the bakery. They were replacing its heart with cheap imitations, pocketing the savings or worse. He drove straight to the office of Rebecca Foster, Heritage Bakes accountant for 15 years. Her small office, tucked above a hardware store, was already lit when he arrived at 6:30 a.m. Michael, what brings you here at this hour? Rebecca asked, her glasses perched on her nose as she looked up from a stack of ledgers. Her graying hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, and her frown deepened as she noted his tense expression. I need answers, Rebecca, Michael said, settling at her desk. Pull up every price change for Heritage Bakes over the past year, and any supplier contracts. Rebecca's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up a spreadsheet that made Michael's blood run cold. Price increases, some as high as 50%, had been implemented across the menu, all authorized by Daniel or Anthony. Blueberry muffins, once $4, now cost $6.50. Coffee had jumped from $1.50 to $2.75. Did they consult you on these? Michael asked, his voice steady despite the storm inside. They said you approved them. Rebecca replied, her brow furrowing. Something about rising costs. They also switched suppliers, Sunrise Foods, Baker's Bargain, a few others. Sad. You wanted to cut expenses. Michael pointed to the unfamiliar supplier names. I never authorized any of this. Pull their invoices. Rebecca opened another file, revealing a trail of transactions that didn't add up. Invoices from Sunrise Foods showed payments for bulk flour and chocolate, but the quantities didn't match the inventory shortages Michael had found. Worse, there were charges for an advertising campaign, $5,000, for a social media blitz that Michael had never seen. No ads, no promotions, just money vanishing into thin air. This is fraud, he muttered, his attorney's mind already building a case. His next stop was the bakery's customer service database, a system he'd implemented years ago to ensure every complaint was logged and addressed. Logging in from Rebecca's computer, he found a digital graveyard of neglected feedback. Hundreds of complaints, stale pastries, overpriced coffee, unfriendly service had been marked resolved, without follow-up. One email from a longtime customer named Linda Carter, no relation, hit him like a punch. Heritage Bakes used to feel like home. Now it's just another overpriced shop. I won't be back. The words stung, echoing his grandmother's. Warning about trust. Michael printed a stack of complaints, tucking them into his briefcase. But he needed more than numbers and emails. He needed to know how deep the rot went and who else was suffering. That afternoon, he returned to Heritage Bakes, disguised again in his cap and sweater. He positioned himself at a corner table, a laptop open as a prop, a tiny microphone hidden in his jacket to record nearby conversations. Within an hour, he witnessed a sabotage in action. Daniel shortchanged a customer, blaming a glitchy register with a smirk. Anthony told a regular, Mrs. Linda Carter herself, that her favorite lemon scone was discontinued due to lack of interest, despite Michael seeing trays of them in the kitchen that morning. Most damning was Sophie Nguyen, the young cashier, who handed a customer a stale muffin. When the customer complained, Anthony shrugged, offering no refund or replacement. Sophie's face burned with embarrassment, and Michael's pen scratched furiously in his notebook as closing time neared. Michael lingered near the back hallway, pretending to search for the restroom. The office door was ajar, and he caught Daniel and Anthony inside, their voices low but clear. Carter called today, asking about the price hikes, Anthony said, sounding annoyed. What did you tell him? Daniel asked, shuffling papers. The usual supply chain issues, inflation. He bought it, like always. Michael's fists clenched, but he stayed hidden. We need to speed this up, Daniel continued. Crestview's investor is coming. Next week, once they confirm the books are a mess, we'll push our offer through the shell company. What about the missing inventory? Anthony asked. Daniel laughed. Blame it on Ellen and the kitchen staff. Say they're wasting supplies. Carter's too soft to question it. Michael slipped out, his heart racing. The pieces were falling into place, but he needed allies. Ellen Harper and Ryan Mitchell, with their quiet defiance, were his best hope. That evening, he arranged a meeting at a small coffee shop, 3 blocks from Heritage Bakes, a neutral spot where they wouldn't be seen. Ellen arrived first, her gray hair tucked under a knitted hat, her eyes scanning the room nervously. Michael had worked with her for 15 years. Yet today, she seemed like a shadow of the confident baker who'd once taught him how to knead dough. "Thank you for coming, Ellen," Michael said, pulling out a chair. She twisted her hat in her hands, her voice low. "I wanted to talk to you for months, Michael, but they watch everything, our breaks, our phone calls, even who we talk to." Ryan arrived moments later, his usual cheer replaced by a tense frown. At 23, he'd shown such promise that Michael had pegged him for management. "I can't stay long," Ryan said, checking his watch. "Anthony checks my time card against the bus schedule. If I'm late, he'll know something's up." Michael leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, the floodgates opened. Ellen's eyes welled as she described how Daniel and Anthony had dismantled the bakery's operations. "They changed your grandmother's recipes first," she said, pulling a small notebook from her bag. "Said you approved it to save money. Margarine instead of butter, artificial vanilla, cheap chocolate. When I objected, Daniel threatened to replace me with someone younger who doesn't question orders." She handed Michael the notebook, its pages filled with dates and details of every recipe change. "I knew you'd never agree to this," she said. "I've known you since you were a boy helping Margaret. Something's wrong." Ryan nodded, his voice tight. "They're cutting hours, too. Most of us can barely make rent." When Karen from the morning shift complained, they fired her the next day, claimed she was stealing, but we all knew it was a lie. "And they're skimming the tip jar. We're lucky to get a third of what's in there." Michael's jaw tightened. "What about the customers?" "They're driving them away on purpose," Ryan said, his voice darkening. "Especially the regulars. They mess up orders, blame delays on new protocols from the owner, and told Mrs. Clara her senior discount was canceled because you said it wasn't profitable." Michael felt a lump in his throat. Heritage Bakes was more than a business. It was a community, a place where families celebrated birthdays and neighbors shared stories. Daniel and Anthony were tearing it apart, and his employees were suffering for their loyalty. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he asked gently. Ellen and Ryan exchanged glances. "They said you were having financial troubles," Ellen said. "That bothering you would force you to close. And they monitor everything, our calls, our breaks." "I tried calling your office once," Ryan added. Anthony intercepted it. "The next day, my hours were cut." Michael nodded, the scope of the betrayal dawning. Daniel and Anthony had built a wall of fear between him and his staff, isolating him from the truth. "Thank you for your courage," he said, his voice steady. "This ends now." As Ellen and Ryan left, Michael stayed at the table, Ellen's notebook open before him. The bakery wasn't failing, it was being murdered from within. But he had evidence now. Inventory discrepancies, fake invoices, ignored complaints, and Ellen's meticulous records. It wasn't enough for court, not yet. He needed a confession, something to nail Daniel and Anthony beyond denial. As he drove home, the weight of his grandmother's journal in his pocket felt heavier than ever. He was one step closer to saving Heritage Bakes, but the hardest part lay ahead. The weight of betrayal hung heavy in Michael Carter's chest as he sat in his home office, surrounded by stacks of evidence. Printed customer complaints, Alan Harper's notebook detailing recipe changes, and Rebecca Foster's financial reports showing fake invoices. The dim glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, mirroring the darkness he felt creeping over Heritage Bakes. It was Friday night, and the clock on his desk read 10 p.m. Michael's fingers traced the edge of his grandmother. Margaret's journal, her words about trust echoing in his mind. Daniel Brooks and Anthony Russo had turned her legacy into a pawn in their greedy game, but Michael was no longer the passive owner they mocked. His years as a corporate attorney had taught him how to dismantle fraud, and tonight he was crafting a trap to bring them down. He picked up his phone and dialed Laura Bennett, his lawyer and confidant for over a decade. Her voice was crisp, despite the late hour. "Michael, I've reviewed the evidence," she said. "The inventory discrepancies, fake invoices, and ignored complaints are damning. But firing them now risks denials and a messy legal fight. You need something they can't wiggle out of." "A confession," Michael said, his voice steady. "I want them to admit everything on record." Laura paused, then replied, "That's risky, but doable. Set a trap to make them think their plan is working. Let them incriminate themselves." Michael leaned back, his mind racing. "I know just the person to help." He hung up and called James Caldwell, a trusted business associate who'd once expressed genuine interest in buying Heritage Bakes years ago, before Michael fully committed to running it. James, now a semi-retired investor with a flair for theatrics, answered on the second ring. "Michael, it's been a while. What's this about?" "I need you to pose as an investor," Michael explained, his tone urgent. "Someone interested in buying Heritage Bakes. Daniel and Anthony are sabotaging the business to force a sale. I need you to get them talking on camera." James chuckled, unfazed. "Sounds like a sting operation." "I'm in. Just tell me what to say and when to show up." By midnight, Michael had outlined the plan. James would approach Daniel and Anthony as a representative of Apex Ventures, a fictional investment firm. Michael would install hidden cameras in the bakery to capture their confession. The trap would hinge on their arrogance, their belief that they'd outsmarted him. But first, he needed to ensure the evidence was airtight. At 3 a.m., Michael returned to Heritage Bakes, the darkness of the early morning cloaking his movements. He met Alex Reed, a security specialist and former client from his attorney days. At the back entrance, Alex carried a black duffel bag filled with discreet cameras, military grade, motion activated, with crystal clear audio and video. "These are top of the line," Alex said, securing a camera behind a framed photo of Margaret above the counter. "They'll transmit to your secure server. You'll have live feed access within the hour." Michael nodded, watching as Alex positioned cameras in the manager's office, behind the register, and in the main seating area, each hidden in plain sight inside a light fixture, a shelf corner, a fake plant. "If they say anything incriminating, we'll have it," Alex assured him. Packing up his tools. As Alex left, Michael lingered in the office, his flashlight sweeping across Daniel's desk. A laptop sat open, its screen dark. On a hunch, he powered it on, using a generic manager password he'd set up years ago, one Daniel hadn't bothered to change. The email inbox revealed a goldmine, a chain between Daniel and Anthony discussing their exit strategy. One message, sent 2 days ago, made Michael's blood run cold. "Once we own this place, we fire Ellen and Ryan first. They're too loyal to Carter's sentimental nonsense. The kitchen staff will fall in line or follow them out." Another email referenced a meeting with Crestview Investments, confirming their plan to present Dr. Financials next week. Michael forwarded the emails to his personal account, his hand shaking with a mix of rage and determination. The audacity of their plan to file loyal employees like Ellen, who'd baked alongside his grandmother, and Ryan, who'd shown such promise, was a personal affront. But it was also the leverage he needed. He shut down the laptop, leaving no trace of his intrusion, and slipped out before the bakers arrived. The next morning, Michael met Laura at her office to refine the strategy. "The emails are a start," she said, scanning the printouts. "But a recorded confession will seal their fate. If James can get them to admit the sabotage, price hikes, ingredient swaps, customer mistreatment, it's game over." Michael nodded, his mind already on the next step. "I'm worried about Ellen and Ryan. They're being threatened, and I need them safe. I also found something else. Daniel's been discouraging our biggest client, Maplewood Elementary. They canceled a standing order for fundraiser pastries last month. and I'm betting it wasn't their choice. Laura's eyes narrowed. That's deliberate sabotage. If James can get them to confirm it, we'll have enough for a lawsuit, not just terminations. Michael spent the afternoon preparing James for his role. Over coffee at a diner far from Heritage Bakes, he handed James a business card for Apex Ventures and a script of leading questions. Push them to brag, Michael said. They're cocky. They'll talk if they think you're a sure bet. James grinned, adjusting his tie. I've played harder roles than this. I'll have them singing by noon. That afternoon, Michael watched the live camera feed from his laptop at home, his heart pounding as James Caldwell, dressed in a tailored suit, strode into Heritage Bakes. The counter camera captured him approaching Anthony, who was wiping down the register with a bored expression. I'm here to see Daniel Brooks or Anthony Russo, James announced, his voice loud enough for the microphones. Regarding the potential sale of this establishment. Anthony's eyes lit up, his posture shifting from indifference to eagerness. I'm Anthony Russo. How can I help you? He took James's card, his smile widening. Apex Ventures? Very perceptive, Mr. Caldwell. Let's talk privately. Michael switched to the office camera as Anthony ushered James inside, where Daniel was already seated, shuffling papers. Mark, this is James Caldwell from Apex Ventures, Anthony said, barely containing his excitement. He's interested in our future opportunity. Daniel stood, extending a hand. Perfect timing, Mr. Caldwell. Have a seat. For the next 20 minutes, Michael watched, his pulse racing, as Daniel and Anthony laid out their treachery in chilling detail. They presented doctored financial reports showing Heritage Bakes' decline, boasting about their inside track on buying the business. The current owner is desperate, Daniel said, his voice dripping with confidence. Another month of these numbers, and he'll take any offer. You're certain he'll sell? James asked, leaning forward, his tone curious but calculated. Anthony laughed. He doesn't have a choice. We've made sure of that. How so? James pressed, his pen poised over a notepad. The camera captured every word as Daniel and Anthony detailed their sabotage, raising prices to drive away regulars, swapping premium ingredients for cheap substitutes, and blaming delays on new protocols from the owner. Anthony even bragged about convincing Maplewood Elementary to cancel their order, claiming it was unprofitable. It's simple economics, Daniel said, smirking. Increase prices, cut quality, tank the books. The location's still prime, and the brand has value for someone who knows what they're doing. And the owner has no idea it's you? James asked, his voice neutral. Anthony's grin was chilling. Carter's a sentimental fool. Thinks this place is about community. We've been feeding him excuses, supply chain issues, changing tastes. He buys it all. Our shell company's ready to swoop in. He'll never know it's us until the sale's final. Michael's hands clenched into fists, but a cold satisfaction settled over him. Every word was being recorded, every boast another. Nail in their coffin. James played his role perfectly, nodding thoughtfully before concluding, I'm very interested. I'll return tomorrow with my investment partners to discuss terms. As James left, the office camera caught Daniel and Anthony's celebration. Did you see his watch? Anthony exclaimed. Apex Ventures is serious money. By next month, Heritage Bakes is ours. Daniel poured himself a coffee, grinning. And Carter's history. Michael closed his laptop, his resolve hardening. The trap was set, but one piece remained. The confrontation. He needed to expose Daniel and Anthony in front of the staff and customers to restore the trust they'd shattered. He spent the evening planning a staff meeting for Monday, inviting key customers like Clara Thompson and the Morning Coffee Club. Laura was preparing legal documents, and the video footage was being edited for maximum impact. One unexpected development added a new layer. Emily Parker, A local reporter who'd been sniffing around Heritage Bakes after hearing complaints about its decline. Michael had noticed her name in the customer feedback database, her comments sharp but fair. He decided to contact her after the confrontation, turning the bakery's revival into a story that could inspire the community and ensure Daniel and Anthony's downfall was public. As he lay in bed that night, Margaret's journal open beside him, Michael felt the weight of what lay ahead. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was his grandmother's dream, a place where people broke bread together. Daniel and Anthony had tried to destroy that, but they'd underestimated him. Tomorrow, he'd finalize the plan. Monday, they'd face the consequences. The Monday morning sun filtered through the frosted windows of Heritage Bakes, casting a warm glow over the rearranged seating area. Rows of chairs faced the oak counter, where a projector screen stood ready, its blank surface a silent promise of revelation. Michael Carter stood in the back office, adjusting the cream-colored baker's coat embroidered with Heritage Bakes in blue script, a relic of his grandmother Margaret's era, rarely worn but heavy with authority. At 52, he felt the weight of her legacy more acutely than ever. Today wasn't just about saving the bakery. It was about restoring the trust he'd let slip away. He glanced at his watch. 7:30 a.m. The staff had been told to arrive by 8 o'clock for an important announcement, and Michael had spent the previous night calling loyal customers. Clara Thompson, the retired teachers' coffee club, young parents with loyalty cards tucked in their wallets. Each had agreed to come, their voices tinged with curiosity and concern. Lavra Bennett, his lawyer, pulled up outside, her sleek leather portfolio in hand. "Everything's ready," she said, her eyes sharp. "The footage is edited for clarity, and the legal paperwork is airtight." "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Michael nodded, his jaw set. "They underestimated me, Laura. Today, they'll see who they're really dealing with." Inside, he instructed Ryan Mitchell to lock the front door and hang a closed for special event sign. Ryan, his usual cheer subdued by weeks of tension, complied without question. The bakery's main room buzzed with nervous energy as employees filed in. Ellen Harper, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Sophie Nguyen, her eyes darting nervously. And others, their faces a mix of confusion and apprehension. By 8 o'clock, the chairs were filled not only with staff but with familiar customers. Clara Thompson, leaning on her cane. Henry Walsh, the retired teacher, clutching a coffee mug. And Linda Carter, whose email about the bakery's lost soul had haunted Michael Dodd at 8:15. The bell chimed, and Daniel Brooks and Anthony Russo strode in, their confidence faltering as they took in the unusual setup. Daniel's slicked-back hair gleamed under the lights, but his eyes narrowed at the sight of Michael in the baker's coat. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "A staff meeting with customers?" "Please join us," Michael said calmly, stepping behind the counter. His tone was steady, but his heart raced with the weight of what was coming. Anthony hesitated, a nervous edge creeping into his posture, but both men took seats near the door, their eyes scanning the room. Michael faced the crowd. The bakery's familiar scents, vanilla, cinnamon, and a hint of betrayal, grounding him. "Heritage Bakes isn't just a business," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "My grandmother Margaret always said it was a community, a family. Some of you have been coming here since her first batch of donuts 40 years ago." His eyes met Clara's, who nodded, her smile soft but strained. "Today's announcement affects everyone here. But first, I want to thank you for your loyalty, employees and customers alike." He gestured to Laura, who dimmed the lights. The projector flickered to life, and the room fell silent as the first security footage appeared. Daniel and Anthony's voices filled the bakery, their words from Friday's meeting with James Caldwell playing in crisp clarity. "The current owner is desperate," Daniel's recorded voice said. Another month of these numbers, and he'll take any offer. Gasps rippled through the staff. Clara clutched her chest, her eyes wide. The footage continued, showing Anthony's chilling laugh. Carter doesn't have a choice. We've made sure of that. They detailed their sabotage, raising prices, swapping premium ingredients for cheap substitutes, driving away regulars like Maplewood Elementary's fundraiser order. It's simple economics, Daniel boasted on screen. Increase prices, cut quality, tank the books. Carter's a sentimental fool. The room was a powder keg of shock and anger. Ellen Harper's hands trembled in her lap, while Sophie Nguyen stared at the floor, her face flushed. Henry Walsh muttered under his breath, his knuckles white around his mug. Michael watched Daniel and Anthony, their faces draining of color, their smug masks crumbling as their own words condemned them. The footage shifted to other scenes. Daniel shortchanging a customer, blaming a glitchy register. Anthony berating Clara for questioning the price of her muffin. Both men laughing about skimming the tip jar. The final clip showed them in the office, Anthony saying, "Once we own this place, we fire Ellen and Ryan first. They're too loyal." To Carter's nonsense. The lights came back on, and the silence was deafening. Daniel lunged toward the door, but two uniformed security guards, hired by Michael for the occasion, blocked his path. "You can't prove anything," Anthony sputtered, his bravado collapsing. "That footage could be doctored." Laura stepped forward, her voice cold. "We have signed affidavits from staff, documented inventory discrepancies, financial records showing fraud, and your explicit confession to what you thought was a potential investor. It's all admissible in court." Michael faced the pair, his voice steady but laced with steel. "Daniel Brooks, Anthony Russo, your employment at Heritage Bakes is terminated, effective immediately. You can't do this," Daniel shouted, his face reddening. "We have contracts. Contracts you violated through theft, fraud, and deliberate sabotage," Michael replied. "Laura will handle the legal details, but in simple terms, you're fired, and you'll never set foot in Heritage Bakes again." The security guards moved forward, escorting the stunned men toward the door. As they passed through the crowd, the humiliation was palpable. Clara Thompson stared at them with disgust, while Henry Walsh shook his head. Sophie, her eyes still wet from past reprimands, stood taller, as if a weight had lifted. Daniel turned back, desperate. "We built this place. You'd be nothing without us." Michael's gaze was unflinching. Heritage Bakes was thriving. FOR 30 years before you arrived. It'll thrive long after you're gone. The door closed behind them, and a spontaneous cheer erupted from the crowd. Employees hugged, customers clapped, and Clara wiped tears from her eyes. Michael raised his hands for quiet, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and responsibility. "I owe you all an apology," he said earnestly. "I trusted the wrong people and became disconnected from this bakery's heart. That changes. Today," he turned to the staff, his voice firm. "Effective immediately, all prices return to their levels from 6 months ago. Margaret's original recipes will be reinstated, using the premium ingredients that made us special. And," he paused, smiling at the shocked faces, "all tips will be distributed daily, with a 15% matching contribution from management." The room erupted in applause. Louder this time, the air electric with joy. Michael called out, "Ellen." "Harper, please come forward." Ellen approached, her steps hesitant, her eyes glistening. "For 15 years, you've been the backbone of our kitchen," Michael said, loud enough for all to hear. "You tried to protect my grandmother's legacy when I failed to. Effective immediately, you're promoted to head manager of Heritage Bakes with a salary to match." Ellen's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling as the staff cheered. I don't know what to say," she stammered. I just wanted to keep Margaret's recipes alive. You did more than that, Michael said. You kept her spirit alive. He turned to Ryan. Ryan Mitchell, step up. The young cashier approached, his eyes wide. Your loyalty deserves recognition, Michael continued. You're promoted to assistant manager, with full tuition assistance for your business degree. Ryan shook Michael's hand, speechless, as the room exploded in celebration. Customers embraced staff, employees hugged each other, the relief and joy palpable. Through the front window, Michael caught a glimpse of Daniel and Anthony in the parking lot, their shoulders slumped, their careers in tatters. Heritage Bakes wasn't just surviving, it was reclaiming its soul. Michael stepped forward, holding up Margaret's journal. My grandmother wrote that a bakery is where a community breaks bread together. I lost sight of that, but you staff and customers brought it back. Today, we start anew. As the crowd dispersed, Ellen lingered, clutching the journal Michael handed her. She'd be proud of you, she said softly. Michael smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in months. The fight wasn't over. Legal battles loomed, and the bakery's revival was just beginning. But for the first time in a long time, Heritage Bakes felt like home again. 3 months after the dramatic confrontation that ousted Daniel Brooks and Anthony Russo, Heritage Bakes hummed with renewed life. The morning rush spilled out the door, a line of customers snaking along Maplewood Avenue, their chatter mingling with the rich aroma of freshly baked donuts and brewing coffee. The frosted glass windows glowed under the spring sun, casting warm patterns across the polished oak counter where Michael Carter stood, sleeves rolled up, handing out pastry boxes. With a smile. At 52, he'd rediscovered the joy of working alongside his staff, a ritual he'd neglected for too long. The bakery felt alive again, its heartbeat restored by the community it served. Michael handed a box of assorted pastries to a young mother, her toddler clutching a Heritage Bakes loyalty card. Your grandmother would be proud, Clara Thompson said, accepting her blueberry muffin, now back to its original size and price of $4. She leaned on her cane, her eyes crinkling with warmth. This place feels like home again. Michael nodded, his throat tight. It's because of people like you, Clara. He scanned the bustling room. Families sharing cinnamon rolls, retirees sipping coffee, students laughing over donuts. The display case sparkled with Margaret's recipes, golden donuts glazed with Belgian chocolate, buttery croissants, and muffins bursting with fresh blueberries. Every change Daniel and Anthony had made cheap ingredients, inflated prices, had been reversed. The bakery's soul was back. Ellen Harper moved through the kitchen with quiet confidence, her gray hair tucked into a bun, her apron dusted with flour. As head manager, she transformed from the hunched, fearful woman Michael had seen months ago. Her promotion had unleashed a torrent of ideas, streamlined baking schedules, staff training programs, and a suggestion box that overflowed with customer feedback. First batch of the community collection is ready, she called, emerging with a tray of golden donuts, each named after a neighborhood staple. The Clara's Blueberry Bliss led the pack, a tribute to their longest customer. Clara blushed as Ellen presented her with the first donut, the room erupting in applause. I don't know what to say, Clara stammered, her eyes misty. This means the world. Other customers crowded around, eager to try creations like the Maplewood Morning, a coffee-glazed donut inspired by the Teachers' Coffee Club, and the Walsh Cinnamon Swirl, named for Henry Walsh. The community collection wasn't just a menu, it was a love letter to the neighborhood, a symbol of Heritage Bakes' rebirth. Ryan Mitchell, now assistant manager, worked the front counter with easy efficiency, training 2 new hires while keeping the line moving. His evening business courses, funded by Michael's tuition assistance, were already shaping his approach. Next in line, please, he called, his smile genuine, a far cry from the tense young man who'd feared Anthony's wrath. Michael caught his eye, nodding approvingly. Ryan was proof that loyalty could rebuild what betrayal had torn down. Lavra Bennett joined Michael at the counter, handing him a folder. "Quarterly numbers are in," she said, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "You might want to sit down for this." Michael flipped through the financial reports, his eyebrows rising. "Are these right?" "Triple-checked," Lavra confirmed. "Revenue's up 40% from last year. Customer visits increased by 35%, and loyalty program registrations have doubled." The resurrection of Heritage Bakes had been deliberate and methodical. Michael had reinstated Margaret's recipes, using premium ingredients sourced from trusted suppliers. Prices returned to reasonable levels, and the loyalty program expanded with perks like free coffee for regulars. Weekly tasting events invited customers to sample new creations, while donations to local schools, starting with Maplewood Elementary's reinstated fundraiser order, rebuilt community ties. Heritage Bakes wasn't just a bakery anymore. It was a gathering place, a cornerstone of Maplewood's identity. The local press had dubbed it the Heritage Bakes Revival. Emily Parker, the reporter Michael had contacted after the confrontation, wrote a feature for the Maplewood Gazette that went viral on food blogs. From betrayal to triumph, how Heritage Bakes reclaimed its soul detailed the sabotage, the confrontation, and the community's role in the recovery. Tourism sites listed the bakery as a must-visit, and customers came from neighboring towns, drawn by the story of resilience dot through the front window. Michael spotted Daniel and Anthony across the street, their faces drawn as they stared at the thriving bakery. Their fortunes had collapsed since their firing. Their attempt to open Urban Bakes, just 4 blocks away, had failed spectacularly. The community, informed by Emily's article and word of mouth, had boycotted their grand opening, picketing with signs reading, "Support Heritage Bakes." Within 6 weeks, Urban Bakes shuttered, leaving Daniel and Anthony with mounting debts and ruined reputations. No bakery or restaurant in the area would hire them, and Michael's lawsuit for financial damages ensured they'd be paying restitution for years. "Should we ask them to leave?" Ryan asked, frowning at the pair. Michael shook his head. "Let them look. There's no better punishment than seeing what they lost." As Daniel and Anthony turned away, their shoulders slumped. The afternoon brought a new milestone, the official launch of the community collection. The bakery buzzed with excitement as customers sampled the new donuts, each bite a celebration of Maplewood's spirit. By closing time, the display cases were nearly empty, a testament to the day's success. Michael gathered the staff for their now regular end-of-day meeting. "Before we review sales," he began, holding up a yellowed piece of paper, "I want to share something." It was Margaret's original business plan, written nearly 40 years ago on her kitchen table. He read the final paragraph aloud. "A bakery is more than a place that sells bread. It's where a community breaks bread together, where special moments are celebrated, where tradition and innovation meet. Heritage Bakes will measure success not in profits, but in the smiles it creates and the community it builds." He looked around at his staff, Ellen, Ryan, Sophie, and the others who'd stood by the bakery through its darkest days. "When I lost sight of that vision, we suffered," Michael said, his voice soft with reverence. "Thanks to you, we found our way back." Ellen raised her coffee cup, her eyes shining. "To Heritage Bakes. To Heritage Bakes." The staff echoed, their voices ringing with pride as Michael locked up that night. He paused at the door, gazing at the bakery his grandmother had built. The betrayal had been painful, but it had taught him vigilance, trust, and the true meaning of legacy. Heritage Bakes wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, a beacon of community in a world too often driven by greed. The story of Heritage Bakes is more than a tale of business, sabotage, and triumph. It's a testament to the power of community, loyalty, and resilience. Michael Carter's journey reflects the universal struggle to honor those who came before us while navigating a world where trust can be exploited. The betrayal by Daniel and Anthony underscores the dangers of prioritizing profit over people. But it's the courage of Ellen, Ryan, and customers like Clara that reminds us of the strength found in unity. Their loyalty to Heritage Bakes, even under pressure, mirrors the real-world communities that rally around shared values, proving that no betrayal can break a bond built on trust and love. The lessons are clear. Vigilance is essential, but so is connection. Michael's reconnection with his staff and customers through restored recipes, fair prices, and community events shows that businesses thrive when they prioritize people over numbers. His story encourages us to protect our own legacies, whether they're family traditions, small businesses, or neighborhood ties, and to never underestimate the power of standing together. If this story of resilience and redemption moved you, subscribe to Legacy Stories on YouTube or your favorite platform. Every week, we share tales of triumph, community, and the human spirit stories like Heritage Bakes that remind us what truly matters. Join us to discover more narratives that inspire and uplift. Together, let's celebrate the legacies that define us.